All right, I'm going to talk about how to become a landscape architect. These are the type of people in the landscaping world. Let's look at them. Horticulturist generally has a horticulture degree. There's no set definition on this, but generally, if you have a degree in horticulture, you can call yourself a horticulturist. A master gardener is actually a volunteer training program. You take a series of generally like 9 to 12 weeks of classes about basic gardening. So it's more simple, but still at least you have some training. A landscape designer can be anyone. Anyone can call themselves a landscape designer, but there are also degrees in landscape design that you can get. This is different than landscape architecture and landscape architect. So landscape architect is a licensed profession. So we're going to talk about that more later. And you can also be a landscape contractor. That is also a licensed profession. To be a landscape contractor, generally it depends on the state what requirements you have, but generally you have to do some type of training or work experience and take a test. And generally you have to work with a company that's insured and regulated to make sure that you aren't taking advantage of customers. Now, you don't necessarily have to have any training in landscaping. It's more regulatory training that they do. So yeah, just so you know. So my qualifications, I have a BS in horticulture, a bachelor's in science of horticulture. So that means I often call myself a horticulturist. And I also have a master's in landscape architecture. That is not enough to call myself a landscape architect, though. We'll talk about that more. I have a permaculture design certificate. That's pretty fun. It's just you learn about permaculture, and generally there's a certain amount of hours of training you're supposed to reach, and then you can get a permaculture design certificate. Not a lot of regulation on this, but it was a fun program, really beneficial actually. And I also have a master's in instructional design, which is unrelated, but I have it. So to be a landscape architect, you have to have, first of all, a degree in landscape architecture. A degree in landscape architecture from an accredited program. So there's like landscape design degrees. You have to have a specific degree in landscape architecture, and your program has to be accredited from whatever board accredits programs. I don't even know. So I have that. I got a master's in landscape architecture. That totally qualifies. Generally, it's a bachelor's or a master's in landscape architecture that qualifies for this. And the second part that I don't have yet is you have to pass the LAR or LARE or LARE exam. So landscape architecture registration examination. I don't know why we always say like the LAR exam when E is for exam, but anyway, you have to pass this test. It comes in 4 parts. There's site analysis, design, construction documentation, and grading and drainage. I have passed site design, I have passed site analysis, I have passed design, and I just took grading and drainage. I skipped construction documentation. So I have to get my scores back and make sure I pass grading and drainage, and then I have to take one more exam to finally pass the whole examination process. So this takes 4 exams. They're about 2 hours each and $50 a piece too. Plus there's more you have to pay to the examination board. And then you also paid for your landscape architecture degree. Anyway, so it's a lot. You can have also work experience, an additional test depending on the state. California requires an extra test. Hawaii requires an extra test. Most states actually require you to work for 2 years under, I think about 2 years under a landscape architect. Utah does not. So I live in Utah. You don't. You just have to pass the LARE and have a degree in landscape architecture. And then the last step is you have to register with the state and then maintain that licensing through continuing education like most licensed professions. So what people I think don't really understand about landscape architecture is landscape architects really aren't trained in plants. You're not tested on plants. That's not what a landscape architecture does, and it doesn't really make sense to be a licensed profession if you're just worried about plants. But what do landscape architects do? They do grading, they do site analysis, they do construction. So, if you're making a retaining wall, most civil engineers do large retaining walls, but a landscape architect can do small retaining wall. You want to make sure that doesn't fall. You want to make sure a deck that a landscape architecture build doesn't fall and hurt somebody. You want for site analysis, you have to determine that you're not building where there can be natural disasters and that kinds of things. So licensed professions really protect health, safety, and general welfare, and that's why landscape architect is a licensed profession, is because it does protect those kinds of things through its profession, but it also, unlike most people believe, doesn't have a lot to do with plants. All right, see you next Tuesday.